"Don't waste your money on me," said the Apache slave woman, but the cowboy paid and took her home. The hot sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty frontier town of Red Rock, a small settlement barely clinging to life in the wide expanse of the plains. The wooden buildings, worn and weathered, creaked in the breeze, their paint peeling, windows rattling. Dust swirled around the boardwalks as people hurried about their daily chores, some glancing warily at strangers, others too absorbed in their own worries to notice. Life in Red Rock was harsh, a place where survival mattered more than comfort, and where everyone had secrets they wanted to keep hidden. Jack rode slowly into town, his horse kicking up clouds of dirt with each step. He had been traveling for days, leaving behind the rolling hills and forests of his home in search of work, rest, or perhaps simply a place to catch his breath from a life of constant movement. His broad-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, but it could not hide the weariness etched on his face. The lines around his eyes told of years spent under the sun, of nights spent by campfires listening to the whispers of the wind, and of countless decisions made alone in the silence of the open prairie. He tied his horse outside the small trading post at the edge of town and stepped down onto the wooden planks. The store smelled of dried herbs, leather, and old wood, a mixture that made him pause for a moment, taking in the quiet calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos outside. Behind the counter, tending to a small stack of goods, was a young woman unlike anyone he had ever seen in this town. Her skin bore the golden-brown hue of her people, her dark hair pulled back tightly to reveal sharp, intelligent eyes. But it was the look in those eyes that caught Jack off guard, an expression of both pain and defiance, a quiet strength that refused to be broken even in the face of hardship. Jack approached slowly, trying not to alarm her. "Hello there," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm looking for supplies, maybe a place to rest for a bit." The woman looked at him carefully, her gaze lingering with suspicion. She did not answer immediately, but the tension in her shoulders suggested she was ready for conflict if it came. Jack noticed the faint bruises on her wrists, the way her hands trembled slightly as she moved, and the small metal chain around her ankle that connected her to the counter, a clear sign that she was not free. He swallowed hard, feeling a surge of anger and sympathy at the same time. He began, hesitating. He didn't know her story yet, and he was careful not to assume anything. "Do you need help?" The words sounded clumsy even to him, but he could not ignore what he saw. She shook her head sharply, her dark eyes flashing with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Don't waste your money on me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Each word carried weight, as if it had been repeated in her mind 1,000 times before. "I am not for sale. No one should buy me, and no one should care for me." Jack's heart ached at her words, though he tried not to show it. He had heard similar statements before in his travels, words spoken by people who had been treated as property rather than as human beings. And yet there was something different in her voice. She was not begging for pity. She was refusing it, holding tightly to the remnants of her dignity even in the darkest circumstances. "I'm not here to buy you as a thing," Jack said carefully, his voice low so others wouldn't overhear. "I want to help, that's all. If you don't want me to, I'll respect that, but I can't just walk away knowing what I see." The woman's eyes softened slightly, but only for a moment. She looked away, focusing on the floor as if trying to disappear into the shadows of the trading post. Jack could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken rules of a town where no one interfered in another's business. Yet he could also feel the quiet plea in her posture, a desire to be recognized not as property but as a person. The storekeeper, a gruff man with a thick mustache, watched silently from behind a pile of sacks. He seemed accustomed to people like Jack, outsiders who thought they could make a difference but often left town just as quickly as they arrived. "Don't waste your breath," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "People like her, they're not worth the trouble. Just leave her be." Jack ignored the warning, feeling a mix of determination and unease. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "I'm not here for trouble," he said. I can see you've been through a lot. You don't have to face it alone, not if you don't want to. You deserve better than this." The woman's lips pressed together tightly. She looked at him for what felt like an eternity, searching for signs of deceit or weakness. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain steady. "Better doesn't exist for someone like me. The world doesn't care, and neither should you. Save yourself the trouble." Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his own emotions. He had been on the frontier long enough to know that courage came in many forms. Sometimes it was in holding a gun, facing an enemy. Sometimes, as he realized now, it was in standing tall when the world wanted you to kneel. This woman had more courage than he had seen in many men he had known, and it stirred something in him he could not ignore. "I can't just walk away," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not when someone's life is at stake." He stood, adjusting his hat, and signaled to the storekeeper to come closer. "How much would it take to set her free?" he asked. His voice was steady, but inside a storm of worry and hope collided. The storekeeper hesitated, clearly surprised by Jack's determination. "I don't know why you'd care," he said, "but it will cost. Not everyone can pay that kind of money." He named a sum large enough to make most men think twice. Jack nodded, his mind made up already. Money could be earned back, but a life was priceless. The woman, Ayana, watched silently as Jack handed over the coins. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She wanted to speak, to protest, but the words caught in her throat. She had spent so long believing no one would help, that no one would see her as more than a possession, that the idea of freedom felt almost foreign. And yet here it was, offered without condition, without judgment. Jack held out his hand not as a gesture of ownership but of partnership. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." Ayana hesitated, looking down at the dusty floor. The chains clinked lightly as she shifted her weight, a sound that seemed to echo the years of hardship she had endured. I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. Her voice was small, almost lost in the hum of the trading post, but Jack heard it. "You won't be," he said firmly. "Not to me. I don't see you as a burden. I see you as a person. That's all that matters." For a moment she studied him, weighing every word, every expression. Finally, slowly, she placed her hand in his. The chains fell away, and with them, a small piece of the weight she had carried for so long. Jack helped her step down from the boardwalk, and together they walked to his horse, ready to leave the town behind. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over red rock. The wind carried the smell of sage and dry earth, and as they rode away, Ayana felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. It was fragile, delicate, and new, but it was there, growing stronger with each mile. Jack glanced at her, seeing not just a woman he had freed, but a survivor, someone whose strength had endured through trials he could barely imagine. And as the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the endless horizon, both of them knew that this journey was only the beginning. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a vast sea of golden grass waving in the wind, broken only by occasional rocky outcrops and distant trees. The sky above was painted in shades of orange and red as the sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the land. Jack guided his horse steadily, keeping a careful pace. Beside him, Ayana rode silently, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon. Each mile they traveled pulled her further from the life she had known, and yet closer to a future she had only dared to imagine in fleeting dreams. At first, Ayana was hesitant to speak. The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of years she had spent surviving alone, of chains that were no longer around her wrists but still seemed to bind her spirit. Jack understood that silence was her shield, a way to measure whether she could trust him, whether he was truly different from the countless others who had treated her as a thing rather than a person. He respected it, never pushing her, letting her set the pace of their journey. The first night they camped near a small stream. Jack built a fire, the sparks rising into the darkening sky. The crackling warmth was comforting, though it could not chase away the memories that haunted Ayana's mind. She watched the flames carefully, as if expecting them to reveal a truth she was not yet ready to face. Jack offered her some food, simple bread and salted meat, and she accepted it cautiously, more out of habit than hunger. "I've been thinking," Jack said quietly, breaking the silence. "I know you've been through a lot. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I want you to know you're not alone now." Ayana's eyes flicked to his, wary but curious. "Alone?" she repeated, almost as if testing the word. It felt foreign on her tongue, something she had not allowed herself to feel in many years. "I've been alone my whole life. Why would that change now?" Jack shrugged, but his eyes were steady. "Because I choose to be here. Because you deserve better than what you've known. That's enough reason for me." She looked away, staring into the shadows cast by the fire. "Better doesn't come to people like me," she murmured, the words bitter but tinged with a fragile hope she could not fully deny. "People like me, we survive, that's all. No one saves us. We save ourselves or we perish." Jack nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, but sometimes someone can help you find the path to saving yourself. That's what I hope to do for you if you let me." The air grew colder as night deepened, but instead of retreating into fear or bitterness, Ayana found herself listening. There was no judgment in Jack's words, only a simple truth. She was seen as a person, not a possession. It was a feeling she had forgotten existed, and it stirred something deep within her. Over the next few days, the journey continued, each mile revealing more about the harsh beauty of the land. Rolling hills gave way to rocky ridges, and the sun bore down on them with unrelenting force. Jack proved to be a skilled and careful guide, knowing which paths were safe, where water could be found, and how to avoid trouble with bandits or wild animals. Ayana watched him, slowly realizing that the cowboy who had freed her was not only brave but reliable. His quiet strength was not the kind born from arrogance or pride. It was the kind that came from experience and an unwavering sense of fairness. At first she kept her distance, her back straight, her hands tense, but Jack never pressured her. He let her observe the world, letting her feel the freedom she had long been denied. Gradually she began to speak, first in short, cautious sentences. "The grass here, it's different from home," she remarked one afternoon, her voice small but curious. Jack smiled faintly. "Yes, it is different, but it's still beautiful. Not every place needs to look the same to matter." Ayana nodded thoughtfully. The idea that beauty could exist beyond the familiar was something she had never considered. Her life had been constrained by captivity, by survival, by the narrow space society had allowed her to occupy. And yet here was a man showing her that the world was wider, richer, and full of possibilities she had never been allowed to see. As the days passed, small acts of trust and kindness began to build a fragile bridge between them. Jack showed her how to hunt small game, how to recognize safe plants for food, and how to navigate by the stars at night. He shared stories of his past, of his family, of his travels, and of the hardships he had endured. Not all of it was easy to hear, but it helped Ayana see that she was not alone in having faced suffering. Pain was a part of life for many, yet it could be overcome with courage and determination. One afternoon, they encountered a sudden storm. The wind picked up violently, tossing dust and leaves through the air, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Jack quickly led the horse to a small cave near the hillside. Inside, they huddled together, trying to stay dry. Ayana's hands shook, but Jack offered his coat, draping it over her shoulders without a word of condescension. The gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. "You don't have to face this alone," he said gently, seeing her fear. "Even when the storm hits, you can stand beside someone who cares." Ayana looked at him, the storm raging outside mirroring the storm inside her. She had never allowed herself to be cared for, never let anyone stand beside her. The thought frightened her, but it also felt comforting. Slowly she nodded, accepting the coat, and for the first time allowed herself a small measure of trust. By the time the storm passed, the air was clear and crisp, the plains shimmering under the soft light of a rainbow. Jack and Ayanna emerged from the cave, their spirits lifted by the beauty after the harshness. They shared a quiet moment, watching the world come alive again. It was in that moment that Ayanna began to understand something important. Freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the ability to choose, to see possibilities, and to trust that life could hold more than pain and hardship. The journey also revealed dangers. They encountered wild animals, coyotes and snakes that reminded them how vulnerable life on the plains could be. Bandits and unfriendly travelers tested their resolve, but with each challenge, Ayanna noticed something changing in herself. She was learning, adapting, and realizing that courage was not about fearlessness. It was about standing firm, making decisions, and taking action even when the path ahead was uncertain. And beside her, Jack was a steady presence, never imposing, always ready to face challenges with her as an equal partner, not a savior. Evenings became a time for reflection. By the fire, Ayanna would tell stories of her family, of her people, and the life she had once known before captivity. She spoke of the traditions, the songs, the quiet moments that had given her comfort. Jack listened without judgment, asking questions respectfully, allowing her to relive memories both joyful and painful. Slowly, their bond deepened, built on shared stories, mutual respect, and the understanding that life could be rebuilt even from the harshest beginnings. One evening, Ayanna spoke in a voice that carried both vulnerability and strength. "I have never had someone care for me without expecting something in return," she admitted. "It is strange, and I don't know if I can trust it yet." Jack nodded, his expression patient. "Trust is earned, not given," he said, "and I don't expect it overnight. You take as long as you need, I'll be here and I won't leave." Those words, simple and steady, sank deep into Ayanna's heart. They were not a promise of ownership or control, but a promise of presence and respect. It was a lesson she had long needed to hear, and in that moment she realized that perhaps freedom was not only about leaving captivity behind, it was also about finding people who would honor her as a human being. As they neared the edge of the frontier and glimpsed the first signs of Jack's homestead in the distance, Ayanna felt a mixture of anticipation and fear. A new chapter was approaching, one filled with uncertainty, responsibility, and possibility. Yet for the first time in her life, she did not face it alone. She had a companion, a guide, and a friend who saw her for who she truly was, a survivor, a strong and courageous woman who had endured unimaginable hardships. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the land, Ayanna understood something vital. The journey was not just about escaping the past. It was about stepping into the future, one choice at a time, with the freedom to decide who she wanted to be. And beside her, Jack rode steadily, silent but unwavering, a reminder that even in a harsh world, kindness and courage could carve a path to hope. The open plains stretched endlessly, golden and rolling under the morning sun, as Jack and Ayanna continued their journey. Each day brought new challenges, and with them, small moments of discovery that slowly shaped their fragile trust. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying the scents of wildflowers, dust, and the faint aroma of distant forests. For Ayanna, every mile was a mixture of fear and wonder. Freedom was new, strange, and both exciting and terrifying. At first, the journey had been simple in its purpose: move quickly, stay safe, and reach Jack's homestead before nightfall. But the more they traveled together, the more Ayanna noticed that this was more than just a journey of distance. It was a journey of trust, of understanding, and of learning what it meant to have a companion who did not demand obedience but offered respect. They rode in silence much of the morning, the only sounds being the rhythmic clop of their horses, hooves on the dirt paths, and the occasional rustle of the grass. Ayana's hands rested lightly on the reins, tense but careful. She was watching Jack, noting his skill and attentiveness. He never rushed, never forced her to do anything she wasn't ready for, and always made sure she had enough water and food. It was small kindnesses like these that began to erode the walls she had built around herself over the years. Finally, unable to contain her curiosity, she spoke. "Jack, how did you know I could trust you?" Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile, as if asking the question might shatter the delicate bond forming between them. Jack glanced at her, his face calm but his eyes thoughtful. "I don't know if you can trust me yet," he admitted. "All I know is that I want you to, and I'll give you time. Trust isn't something forced, it's earned one day at a time. You decide when it's enough." Ayana considered his words carefully. They were honest without expectation, and that honesty felt unfamiliar and comforting. She nodded slightly, looking down at her hands as if testing the idea of freedom with her own fingers. I want to try," she said softly. The words were small, but they carried weight. For the first time, she felt the possibility of being seen not as a captive, not as property, but as a person worthy of care. That afternoon, they came across a narrow river, its waters rushing swiftly over smooth stones. The banks were muddy and uneven, and crossing would require caution. Jack dismounted first, tying the horse to a nearby tree and stepping into the cold water to test the depth. Ayana watched him closely, her body tense. It was one thing to be free from chains. It was another to trust her life in the hands of someone else. "It's not too deep," Jack called, his voice steady over the roar of the river. "Step carefully, and I'll be right here if you need help." Ayana nodded, her heart pounding as she guided the horse into the river. The water swirled around her legs, cold and fast, and she gripped the reins tightly. Jack walked beside her, his hand ready to catch her if she slipped, but never pushing or taking over. Step by step, they made it to the other side, wet and tired but triumphant. Ayana allowed herself a small smile, feeling a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. As they continued, Jack shared stories of his travels, of wide deserts, high mountains, and quiet valleys where the wind sang through the trees. He spoke of people he had met along the way, some kind, some cruel, all teaching lessons in the way life unfolded. Ayana listened intently, fascinated by the world beyond her own experiences. She realized that there was more to life than survival. There was beauty, curiosity, and the chance to create a future that mattered. One evening, they made camp near a grove of trees. The air was cooler here, filled with the scent of pine and earth. Jack built a fire while Ayana gathered dry wood, her movements cautious but competent. The warmth of the flames and the soft crackle of burning wood offered a sense of comfort. For the first time in years, Ayana allowed herself to relax, to sit beside the fire without fear. Jack noticed her quiet shift and offered her a small portion of dried meat. "Eat," he said simply. "You need strength for the days ahead." Ayana hesitated, then accepted it. She chewed slowly, savoring the taste of food that was prepared for her, not stolen or forced. The act was small, yet it carried meaning. She was being cared for without strings, without expectation, and it slowly began to reshape her understanding of trust and freedom. That night, as the fire dimmed, Ayana finally spoke of her past. She told Jack about her family, about the people she had loved and lost, and about the hardships that had forced her into captivity. Her voice trembled at times, but Jack listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. Each story she told was like a stone lifted from her chest, and with each tale she felt lighter, freer. I thought no one would ever care," she admitted quietly. "I thought I would always be alone, always surviving, never living." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "You're not alone anymore, and you don't have to just survive, you can live. That's your choice now." For the first time, Ayana felt a spark of hope she had almost forgotten. The journey was more than physical. It was a journey toward reclaiming her life, learning to trust again, and discovering that freedom was more than the absence of chains. It was the ability to choose, to hope, and to be seen as a person. Over the following days, they encountered more challenges. A herd of wild buffalo blocked their path one afternoon, forcing them to find a detour through rocky hills. Another day, a sudden storm soaked them to the bone, and they had to take shelter under a natural rock overhang. Through each challenge, Jack remained calm and protective, never commanding, never belittling. His steady presence reassured Ayana, showing her that not everyone in the world sought to harm or control her. During quiet moments, Ayana began to teach Jack small things about her own culture, songs, ways of reading the land, and stories of her people. Jack listened with respect, fascinated by the knowledge she shared. It was a reversal of roles in some ways. She, once captive, now held wisdom he did not possess. The sharing created a bond of mutual respect, strengthening their partnership as they moved closer to the ranch. One evening, they came across a small village near a river. Jack suggested they stop to rest and gather supplies. Ayana hesitated, wary of the strangers, but she trusted Jack enough to follow. The villagers were curious but kind, offering food and water. Jack spoke for them both, careful not to reveal too much of Ayana's past, but enough to gain their trust. Watching her interact cautiously with the villagers, Ayana realized that the world could be kinder than she had been led to believe. Not everyone was cruel, not every person sought to control or harm. By the time they left the village, Ayana's demeanor had changed subtly. She rode taller in the saddle, her gaze clearer and her steps steadier. She had begun to reclaim a sense of agency, understanding that freedom was not just a gift given but a state she could embrace fully. Jack noticed the change and silently admired her growing confidence. As they approached the distant hills that marked the edge of Jack's homestead, Ayana reflected on the journey so far. The days had been long and difficult, but each challenge had taught her something valuable. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. She had learned that trust was fragile, but worth the risk. And she had learned that a companion, someone who sees you as a person and not an object, could make all the difference in the world. Jack, riding slightly ahead, glanced back at her with a small, encouraging smile. "Almost there," he said. "You'll see home soon." Ayana nodded silently, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness filling her. Home was not just a place. It was the promise of possibility, the chance to rebuild, and the first step toward truly living. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of hope that was not tinged with fear, a hope that the future could be hers to shape. And as the sun began to dip low on the horizon, painting the plains in warm shades of gold and orange, Ayana realized that this journey had been more than a trip across the land. It had been a journey into herself, a path toward freedom, trust, and the quiet courage to embrace life again. With Jack by her side, steady and unwavering, she felt ready to face whatever awaited at the end of the trail. The horizon stretched endlessly, full of possibility, and for the first time, Ayana believed that she could truly live, not just survive, but live fully, with dignity, courage, and hope. The journey had changed both of them. Jack's homestead, now visible on the horizon, was more than just a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by fences. It was a symbol of stability, safety, and the possibility of a new life. Ayana had traveled far across the plains, facing dangers she never imagined, but with each step she felt herself growing stronger, more confident, and slowly learning to trust not just Jack, but herself. The closer they rode, the more Ayana noticed the subtle beauty of the homestead. A small barn stood at the edge of the property, its wooden planks weathered but sturdy. Fields stretched beyond, patches of green contrasting with the golden hues of the plains. Chickens clucked softly near the farmhouse, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh hay and earth. For Ayana, who had spent years in confinement, the scene was almost overwhelming. It was not just the sight of home, it was the promise of a life she had never thought possible. As they entered the yard, Jack dismounted and held out a hand to Ayana. "Welcome home," he said simply, his voice calm but warm. There was no fanfare, no expectation, only a gesture of inclusion. Ayana hesitated for a moment, her eyes sweeping over the property as if trying to take it all in at once. She had been trained to expect disappointment, to brace for betrayal, yet here was a place where none of that seemed to matter. Jack noticed her hesitation and spoke again, gently. "Take your time. This is your choice, too. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. You're safe here." Ayana felt a lump in her throat. She had been offered kindness before, but it had always come with conditions. Here, there were no chains, no price to pay, no expectations beyond simply being herself. Slowly, she reached out, allowing Jack to guide her down from the horse. For the first time, she felt the ground beneath her feet not as a threat, but as a place where she could stand firmly, freely. Over the next few days, Ayana began to explore the homestead. Jack gave her space to move at her own pace, never pushing, never asking for more than she could give. She learned the rhythms of the land, the way the sun rose over the fields, how the chickens moved, and how to care for the animals without fear. Every task, no matter how small, became a lesson in independence and confidence. She found satisfaction in small victories, feeding the animals, carrying water, or mending simple fences. These moments, once mundane, now held significance. They were evidence that she could contribute, belong, and thrive. Jack, meanwhile, gave her guidance without authority. He taught her how to tend to crops, how to recognize the signs of approaching weather, and how to manage the chores of the homestead. He shared stories of his life, of mistakes, triumphs, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Ayana listened, absorbing not just knowledge but a sense of trust and respect. She realized that this was not simply a place of work or survival. It was a place where learning and growth were possible, where mistakes were accepted as part of life, and where someone truly cared about her well-being. One evening, after a long day of tending the fields, Ayana and Jack sat on a wooden bench outside the farmhouse. The sky above was a tapestry of deep blues and purples, dotted with the first stars of night. Ayana looked up, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. "I never thought I could feel safe," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Even when I was free before, freedom felt like danger." Jack nodded. "Freedom is more than being unchained. It's being able to live, to make choices, to trust yourself and others. It takes time, but you're doing it." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and cautious hope. "I've been so used to being alone, to surviving by myself. I don't know if I can just belong somewhere." "You can," Jack said firmly, yet gently. "You belong here if you want to. Belonging isn't about control or ownership. It's about being accepted, respected, and safe. You decide how close you want to be, and I'll respect it." The days became weeks, and with each one, Ayana's confidence grew. She learned to cook over the open fire, to repair broken tools, and even to ride the land with Jack, observing the horizon for changes in weather or threats. She discovered that freedom was not just physical, it was mental and emotional. The choices she made mattered, and she had the power to shape her own life. At times, old fears resurfaced, memories of captivity, moments of mistrust, shadows that whispered doubt. But Jack never dismissed them. Instead, he offered reassurance, presence, and gentle guidance. Slowly, Ayana realized that trust was not about forgetting the past, but about finding someone who would walk with her through the future, steady and dependable. One afternoon, as they tended to the fields together, Ayana shared more of her story. She spoke of her people, the traditions, and the songs that had comforted her in her youth. Jack listened intently, asking questions with respect, never interrupting, never dismissing her experiences. In turn, he shared his own tales of hardship and perseverance, building a bridge of mutual understanding between them. They laughed together at small moments of clumsiness, celebrated successes in their work, and supported each other through minor frustrations. These shared experiences, though simple, strengthened their bond and gave Ayana a sense of belonging she had never known. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the fields in warm golden light, Ayana felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. She had come far from the captive, fearful girl she had been when Jack first freed her. Now, she was strong, capable, and beginning to trust not only Jack but also herself. She realized that freedom was not just about escaping captivity. It was about embracing life fully, with all its challenges, joys, and responsibilities. Jack watched her quietly, admiring her resilience. He had seen many people in his life, but Ayana's courage and determination were extraordinary. She had faced unimaginable hardship, yet she was learning to live again, to trust, and to reclaim her identity. His respect for her grew with each passing day, not out of pity, but out of recognition for her strength and humanity. Evenings were often quiet, filled with the sounds of the farm settling into the night. Sometimes Ayana would sit by the fire, reflecting on her journey and the choices that had brought her here. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had learned that trust was built slowly, through consistency, respect, and patience. And she had learned that kindness, when offered without expectation, could change a life in profound ways. One night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Ayana turned to Jack. "I never thought I could be happy," she admitted, her voice soft. "Not like this. I thought happiness was for other people, not someone like me." Jack smiled gently. "Happiness isn't about who you were or what you've endured. It's about what you do with the life you have now. And you're doing it beautifully." Ayana felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she truly believed it. She was not just surviving, she was living. She had a place, a purpose, and someone who saw her for who she was, not as a captive, not as property, but as a person deserving of respect, care, and love. The weeks turned into months, and Ayana's confidence and skills continued to grow. She became adept at caring for the animals, tending the fields, and managing the homestead alongside Jack. She even began to teach him small things about her people's traditions, sharing songs and stories that enriched their daily lives. Their partnership became one of mutual respect, trust, and shared responsibility. Ayana realized that home was not just a physical place. It was a feeling of safety, belonging, and being valued. Jack had given her the space to discover that feeling on her own terms, without pressure or expectation. And in return, she brought her strength, courage, and wisdom to the homestead, enriching their lives in ways neither could have imagined at the start of their journey. As the seasons shifted and the land transformed with the passing months, Ayana stood on the porch of the farmhouse, looking out over the fields bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. She breathed in the fresh air, feeling the freedom she had longed for in her bones. She was no longer the frightened, captive girl she had been. She was a survivor, a learner, a woman who had reclaimed her life and embraced the possibilities of the future. And as Jack joined her on the porch, silent but steady, Ayana realized that the journey had not only led her to a home, it had led her to herself. She had discovered courage, trust, and hope in ways she never thought possible. The homestead was not just a place to live. It was a place to grow, to heal, and to thrive. And for the first time in her life, Ayana truly believed that she could shape her destiny, with freedom, dignity, and strength guiding every step. The first light of dawn painted the homestead in soft shades of pink and gold. Birds sang quietly from the trees, and the wind carried the fresh scent of grass and earth. Ayana stood near the barn, her hands resting on a wooden fence, watching the sun rise over the fields. Each morning now felt like a new beginning, full of promise and possibilities she had never dared to imagine. She had come so far since the day Jack had freed her in the dusty trading post, and the journey had transformed her in ways both subtle and profound. Life at the homestead had settled into a comfortable rhythm, though it was far from easy. Ayanna learned the work of the land with steady determination. She cared for the animals, tended the fields, prepared meals, and repaired fences. Each task was a challenge, yet it became a source of pride. She discovered strength she had not known she possessed, and the satisfaction of accomplishment filled her with quiet joy. Every day was a lesson, every moment an opportunity to grow. Jack observed her progress with quiet admiration. He never imposed himself or treated her work as proof of obligation. He celebrated it as evidence of her courage, skill, and determination. Over time, Ayanna realized that her freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the ability to learn, to contribute, and to build a life she could call her own. It was the chance to shape her destiny without fear or restriction. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high in the sky, Ayanna and Jack worked together to repair a section of the fence that had been damaged during a recent storm. Their movements were synchronized, almost instinctively, a silent understanding growing between them. Ayanna handed tools to Jack, steadying herself on the uneven ground, and he guided her gently when a post was too heavy to lift alone. Through the shared labor, their bond deepened, not as protector and captive, but as partners, equals in effort and purpose. During breaks, they sat under the shade of a large oak tree, sharing stories and small laughs. Ayanna found herself opening up more each day, speaking of dreams she had long suppressed, of the life she wished she could have, and of the hope that had quietly begun to grow in her heart. Jack listened without judgment, encouraging her to express herself freely, always ready with gentle words of support or practical advice. The trust between them had evolved into something deeper than companionship. It was respect, understanding, and quiet affection. One evening, as they finished preparing dinner, Ayanna paused to look around the homestead. The barn stood sturdy, the fields neat, and the animals safe and content. She felt a sense of ownership, not in the sense of property, but in the knowledge that her efforts and choices had made this place better. She had transformed not only the land but herself. The fear that had once haunted her steps was replaced with confidence, and the uncertainty of the future was tempered by the strength she had found within. "Jack," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never imagined life could be like this. I thought I would always be afraid, always running, always alone, but now I feel like I belong." Jack looked at her, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "You do belong, Ayanna, and not because of me or this place or anything I've done. You belong because of who you are. You've worked for it, earned it, and you've chosen it. That's what makes it real." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, a mix of gratitude, relief, and joy. She had never believed that life could offer such simple, steady happiness. The warmth in Jack's words reinforced what she had begun to feel. Freedom was not only being unchained, but being valued, seen, and trusted. As the weeks turned into months, Ayanna continued to grow more confident in her daily life. She began taking on more responsibility, learning to plan the work on the farm, care for the animals, and anticipate challenges before they arose. She discovered that her voice mattered, that her decisions could influence the well-being of the homestead, and that she had a place in the world where she was both needed and respected. One day, while checking the fences near the far edge of the property, Ayanna paused to watch the sun dip low behind the hills. The sky was painted in fiery oranges and soft purples, reflecting on her own sense of transformation. She remembered the girl who had once been sold in a dusty trading post, shackled and frightened, and marveled at the woman she had become. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought her here, to a life she could call her own, filled with hope, dignity, and purpose. Jack joined her silently, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward the sunset. Ayana smiled softly. "Yes, it is, and it feels mine somehow, not just the land but the life itself. I never thought I could feel this way." "You earned it," Jack replied. "Every step, every choice, every moment you decided to keep going, that's what brought you here. You didn't just survive, Ayana. You lived, truly lived, and now you have a chance to keep doing so." That evening, as they settled by the fire, Ayana reflected on her journey. She thought of the fear that had once gripped her, the uncertainty that had filled her days, and the loneliness that had weighed heavily on her spirit. All of it had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had learned that trust was not fragile, but something that could grow with patience and care. And she had realized that freedom was not just a condition, it was a choice, a state of being that she could embrace fully. In the quiet moments, Ayana began to dream about the future. She imagined planting new crops, caring for the animals, and building a life that was truly hers. She thought about helping others who had been in her position, sharing what she had learned about courage, trust, and the value of being treated with respect. She wanted to live fully, not just for herself, but as a testament to the strength she had found within. Jack watched her, quietly proud. He had freed her, yes, but the transformation had been hers alone. Her courage, determination, and resilience had carried her through the trials of the journey and into the life she now embraced. His role had been small in comparison to the strength she had shown, and he respected her all the more for it. As the seasons changed, the homestead flourished. Ayana's confidence and skills continued to grow, and her bond with Jack deepened, built not on ownership or obligation, but on respect, trust, and shared experience. They laughed together, faced challenges side by side, and supported each other in the quiet and difficult moments alike. Their partnership became a true companionship, rooted in equality, care, and understanding. One morning, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, Ayana walked through the fields, feeling the cold wind on her face. She paused to look back at the homestead, its smoke rising gently from the chimneys, and smiled. She had come so far, from chains to freedom, from fear to confidence, from solitude to companionship. Her journey had been difficult, but it had brought her here, to a life she had fought for and earned, a life full of hope and purpose. Jack joined her, handing her a warm cup of tea. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, nodding toward the snow-dusted landscape. "Yes," Ayana said, sipping the tea and feeling its warmth spread through her. "And it feels like home, truly home." "I never thought I could feel this way." "You deserve it," Jack replied simply. "And you've earned it, not because of me, not because of luck, but because of who you are. You never gave up, and now you have a life you can be proud of." Ayana looked at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude, respect, and something deeper she could not quite name. She realized that freedom had not just been given to her, it had been nurtured, explored, and embraced through her own courage and choices. She had discovered that life could hold beauty, safety, and dignity, and that she had the strength to make the most of it. In the months that followed, Ayana's presence transformed the homestead. Her laughter filled the air, her care strengthened the animals, and her hard work kept the land thriving. She became a symbol of resilience and hope, not just for herself, but for anyone who might hear her story. People who had known her as a captive now saw her as a capable, strong, and dignified woman who had reclaimed her life through courage and determination. Evenings were often quiet and peaceful. Ayana would sit by the fire, reflecting on her journey, while Jack read or tended to the animals. Sometimes they shared stories, sometimes they worked in silence, and sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfort of being together. There was no rush, no expectation, only the shared understanding that life could be rebuilt with patience, care, and respect. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Ayana felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had survived hardships that once seemed insurmountable, and now she had a life filled with freedom, trust, and purpose. She had discovered that courage, kindness, and respect could change a life, and that true freedom was found not just in leaving captivity behind, but in embracing the possibilities of the future. Ayana looked at Jack, a quiet smile on her lips. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me a chance, for trusting me, and for letting me find my place in this world." Jack nodded, returning her smile. "No, Ayana, thank you for showing me what courage really is and for letting me be part of your journey. The world is better for people like you in it." And in that moment, with the homestead bathed in the warm glow of twilight, Ayana realized that she had truly come home, not just to a place, but to a life she had earned, a life filled with hope, dignity, and the freedom to be herself. The journey had been long, the challenges many, but the reward was more than she could have imagined. She was free, she was strong, and she was ready to embrace every new day with courage, trust, and the knowledge that she could shape her own future.